Okay, now we're going to go to the first person on the phone today. Welcome. Excuse me a second. No, you have to click next. You have to click next. Welcome. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You hear me?
Okay, excuse me a second. We're trying something new, and someone else is working the controls. So this is also on video, so I have to explain because people are seeing me do this. Can you turn up the volume all the way so we can on the computer, so we can hear better? Yeah, just okay. All right, let's try it again. Please go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Please go ahead.
Great. Good afternoon, brother. I'm looking at Revelation 22, verses 10 and 11. We read these verses many times and talked about them, but it says in verse 10, "Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand." Okay. My question is, but in the next verse 11, it talks about four things, four positions, I would say, and I'm wondering, is this a seal? Since it says some of the words of the saying of the prophecy of this book, is this a seal on man's condition in verse 11? Because what I'm saying is, what I'm asking is because we discussed that those was many that was under the teaching of the ending of the church age and the mid-21st teaching, very adamantly teaching it and really believing, but they now gone back. So if that has happened, will they one day discover, oh wait, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I should go back to the teaching because the church age is not it as I thought it was. So is this a seal in verse 11 that whatever you are, you will be in that until the end of time?
Well, let's read the verses you're referring to. In Revelation 22, beginning in verse 10, it says, "And he saith unto me, Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand." Now, we know that the Bible has information in it concerning seal up the word, which is declared in Daniel. God is using Daniel really as a figure of the Bible as a whole. And let me read that verse in Daniel 12. Daniel chapter 12. It says in verse 4, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." And it's repeated in verse 9. "And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." And the time of the end, the end stage of Earth's history began in the year 1988 with the Great Tribulation. When judgment began at the house of God, that began the end of the world. And we've been living in the end of the world since that point. And that's why we can look back and we see all sorts of insane things. They're absolutely insane. When anyone who is of any significant age, 50, 60, 70, or 80, or any age like that, will remember an incredibly different Earth, an incredibly different world in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and for most of the 80s. Just everything it's like it bears almost little to no relationship to our modern life, to these last few decades, and it's just amazing when we think about it, when we We think about every aspect of society being changed, as it were, almost overnight. And the reason is, and actually, you know, you can go back in history. It wasn't that, there's fads and generation changes from generation. Well, no. You go back from the 20th century to the 19th century, you're going to find a great deal of consistency. Go back to the 18th century, the 17th, the 16th. Keep going back. You'll find consistency, and that consistency of morality, even though, of course, there was evil in the world, the consistency of the way people in the world lived was broken and broken beyond repair in these last few decades. And the only explanation is from the Bible, as the Bible tells us that Satan would be loosed, that the nations would worship him, his deadly wound would be healed, he would overcome the camp of the saints and be seated as the man of sin. And the Bible tells us in Romans 1 concerning God giving up man to vile, ugly sins like never before in history. And it matches perfectly. This is prophecy being fulfilled. There's no other explanation. There's no other way the world could be doing the things it's doing in these last few decades, and it's just gone into complete madness in the last few years, except we're at the end of the world. And so at the end of the world, the Bible that was sealed up became unsealed. And we do find that over these last same few decades, as the world is going insane, as the church is going insane, just think about people involving themselves in holy laughter. What does that have to do with God or the Bible? And yet you have people thinking, oh, this is a wonderful thing. Or people falling over backwards, being slain in the Spirit, and thinking it's a great thing. And we just got done discussing speaking in tongues. And 500 million people, professed Christians, don't recognize that basic. It's elementary. It's the basic point of the gospel, is understanding how God delivers the gospel through the Bible only. And you have over 500 million, and how many more 100 million now, and how many more 100 million besides that would not say, as I've been part of churches in the past, well, we won't say they're not brothers and sisters. We don't agree with their speaking in tongues. You see, they don't really have a sound understanding of the truth in order to declare, well, that's another gospel. And we have this chaotic spiritual mess in the church. We have the world in utter chaos, not knowing what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is left, what is right. They have no understanding of the most simple elements of basic morality any longer. It is lost. And at the same time, we have been learning incredible amounts of truth as God has opened up the scriptures, and we can go back and we find that, yes, in the early 90s, we were learning information, especially after 1994. We began to learn of the faith of Christ. We've learned of the end of the church age. We've learned of the proper doctrine of the teaching of hell, which is annihilation and not a place of eternal torment. We've learned concerning Christ making payment for sins at the foundation of the world, and we're continuing to learn regarding the spiritual judgment that God has brought to pass on the world, and so forth. We're learning that the elect are appearing before the judgment seat, that God's program of judging the world is to divide Satan's kingdom, and we're continually learning. Seal up the word till the time of the end. And that's what Revelation 22 is saying, that it's the time of the end. So seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. It's the end of time, and more specifically, verse 11 and verse 12 and 13 identify with Christ coming. And I'll read verse 11. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. The only time period in the history of the world in which this kind of statement found in verse 11 could take effect is on May 21, 2011, and those days after that we're presently living in, because notice, God himself is declaring concerning the unjust, let him be unjust still. Concerning the filthy, let him be filthy still. Well, where's the salvation program of God? Where's the mercy of God? Isn't it, no matter what the situation, potentially from man's perspective, there was salvation available for the unjust, for the filthy, so that they could at least have the hope of going to God, beseeching him, crying out, "Oh Lord, I know I'm filthy in my sin. I know I'm unjust, not a righteous man. None are righteous, O Lord, your word tells me. But could it be that I might be saved by the grace of God, and that you might translate me out of this kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of your dear Son, that though I be unrighteous, you might make me righteous through the righteousness of Christ." There's none of that here. There's none of that. And that's why it's not applying to the Great Tribulation, because there was still great salvation available during the Great Tribulation, and we could never say at any point of those 23 years of Great Tribulation, well, even when God commanded to come out of the church, we dare not say, well, let those in the church who are unjust and filthy because they're not obeying the word of God, let them remain unjust and filthy. Would we dare say that? No. Our hope was they would, in the time remaining before the door of heaven shut on that date, that they would also come out. So we prayed for them. We prayed that God would open their eyes and ears and save them, and draw them out and save them. And so it doesn't apply, and it certainly didn't apply to all the unsaved people in the world during that about 17 years of latter rain. Could it be said, did God ever say, let the ones unjust be unjust still? Well, God forbid. God forbid, because he had a great multitude of people to save. And if he ever pronounced as the elect were children of wrath even as others, and therefore unjust and filthy in their sin before salvation, if God ever pronounced let them be unjust, they could not become saved. only when he shut the door of heaven. Only then this verse is understandable. This verse, it follows that God has completed his salvation program. Everyone unjust, because heaven's door is shut and there is no more salvation available, will remain unjust. Everyone filthy will remain spiritually filthy. And everyone righteous through the righteousness of Christ, that is, they have become saved by God's grace, will remain righteous and holy, holy, and so forth. It's only then that everyone's spiritual condition is locked into place. And so God, I think by linking verse 10 to this, is also letting it be known that Judgment Day is a time in which the Bible remains unsealed. And as it says in Romans chapter 2 concerning Judgment Day in verse 5, but after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasurest up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. Now, I always try to separate the second part of verse 5 to read it more slowly, because it's saying something very big. It's making a major statement regarding God's plan for the day of wrath. So let me read it again. The day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. It's not just the day of wrath of the righteous judgment of God, but it's joined together with the conjunction, with the little word and, the day of wrath and revelation. So we could say it's the day of revelation of the righteous judgment of God, as well as being the day of wrath. And before, it just didn't make any sense. We would had no ability to understand that kind of statement in the Bible. Judgment Day is the end of the world. Christ comes, all the wicked are before him, immediately pronounced guilty, and we had no understanding that the elect would be making an appearance before his seat. But our understanding was it was just 1, 2, 3. It's all done. The end of the world comes, and they're thrown into hell. We had all kinds of things about our understanding of the final judgment wrong. There's no place of hell. It's not only the wicked, but the righteous are there also, and it's not instantaneous. It's a prolonged judgment, and it's also a time, since it is a prolonged judgment period, in which God takes the opportunity of this tribulation period, this second or additional tribulation period upon the world this time. The Lord takes the opportunity to reveal more and more details concerning his righteous judgment program. It's the day of revelation, or the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. And that's why we're learning so much about that very thing. If you look at all the information we've been learning the last few years since May 21, 2011, just about everything we've learned involves God's judgment program. And that's because it has always been the Lord's plan to reveal these things at this time. But thank you for sharing your question.